Anarchism and Socialism by Georgy Valentinovich Plekhanov. Chapter 5. Bakunin. We have seen that in their criticism of the political constitution, the fathers of anarchy always based themselves on the utopian point of view. Each one of them based his theories upon an abstract principle, Stirner upon that of the ego, Proudhon upon that of the contract. The reader has also seen that these two fathers were individualists of the first water. The influence of Proudhonian individualism was, for a time, very strong in the Romance countries, France, Belgium, Italy, Spain, and in the Slav countries, especially Russia. The internal history of the International Working Men's Association is the history of this struggle between Proudhonianism and the modern socialism of Marx. Not only men like Tolaine, Chemallet, or Murat, but men very superior to them, such as the Pape, e.g., were nothing but more or less opinionated, more or less consistent mutualists. But the more the working class movement developed, the more evident it could be that mutualism could not be its theoretical expression. At the international congresses, the mutualists were forced by the logic of facts to vote for the communist resolutions. This was the case, e.g., at Brussels in the discussion on landed property. Little by little, the left wing of the Proudhonian army left the domain of individualism to entrench itself upon that of collectivism. The word collectivism was used at this period in a sense altogether opposed to now which it now has in the mouths of French Marxists like Jules Guesde and his friends. The most prominent champion of collectivism was at this time Michael Bakunin. In speaking of this man, we shall pass over in silence his propaganda in favor of the Hegelian philosophy, as far as he understood it, the part which he played in the revolutionary movement of 1848, his pan-Slavist writings in the beginnings of the 60s, and his pamphlet, Romanov, Putkachev, or Pestel, London, 1862, in which he proposed to go over to Alexander II if the latter would become the Tsar of the Mujiks. Here we are exclusively concerned with his theory of anarchist collectivism. A member of the League of Peace and Liberty, Bakunin, at the Congress of this association at Bern in 1869, called upon the League, an entirely bourgeois body, to declare in favor of the economical and social equalization of classes and of individuals. Other delegates, among whom was Charest, reproached him with advocating communism. He indignantly protested against the accusation. Because I demand the economic and social equalization of classes and individuals, because, with the Workers' Congress of Brussels, I have declared myself in favor of collective property, I have been reproached with being a communist. What difference, I have been asked, is there between communism and collectivism? I am really astounded that Monsieur Charest does not understand this difference, he who is the testamentary executor of Proudhon. I detest communism because it is the negation of liberty, and I cannot conceive anything human without liberty. I am not a communist because communism concentrates and causes all the forces of society to be absorbed by the state, because it necessarily ends in the centralization of property in the hands of the state, while I desire the abolition of the state, the radical extirpation of this principle of the authority and the tutelage of the state, which, under the pretext of moralizing and civilizing men, has until now enslaved, oppressed, exploited, and depraved them. I desire the organization of society and of collective or social property from below upwards, by means of free association, and not from above downwards, by means of some authority of some sort. Desiring the abolition of the state, I desire the abolition of property individually hereditary, which is nothing but an institution of the state, nothing but a result of the principle of the state. This is the sense, gentlemen, in which I am a collectivist and not at all a communist. In In another speech at the same Congress, Bakunin reiterates what he had already said of statist communism. "It is not we, gentlemen," he said, "who systematically deny all authority and all tutelary powers, and who in the name of liberty demand the very abolition of the authoritarian principle of the state. It is not we who will recognize any sort of political and social organization whatever that is not founded upon the most complete liberty of everyone. But I am in favor of collective property because I am convinced that so long as property, individually hereditary, exists, the equality of the first start, the realization of equality, economical and social, will be impossible." This is not particularly lucid as a statement of principles, but it is sufficiently significant from the biographical point of view. We do not insist upon the ineptitude of the expression, the economic and social equalization of classes. The General Council of the International dealt with that long ago. We would only remark that the above quotations show that Bakunin 1. Combats the state and communism in the name of the most complete liberty of everybody. 2. Combats property, individually hereditary, in the name of economic equality. 3. Regards this property as an institution of the state, as a consequence of the very principles of the state. 4. Has no objection to individual property if it is not hereditary, has no objection to the right of inheritance if it is not individual. In other words, 1. Bakunin is quite at one with Proudhon so far as concerns the negation of the state and communism. 2. To this negation he adds another, that of property, individually hereditary. 3. His program is nothing but a total arrived at by adding up of two abstract principles, that of liberty and that of equality. He applies these two principles, one after the other, and independently one of the other, in his criticism of the existing order of things, never asking himself whether the results of these two negations are reconcilable with one another. 4. He understands, just as little as Proudhon, the origin of private property and the causal connection between its evolution and the development of political forms. 5. He has no clear conception of the meaning of the words individually hereditary. If Proudhon was a utopian, Bakunin was doubly so, for his program was nothing but a utopia of liberty reinforced by a utopia of equality. If Proudhon, at least to a very large extent, remained faithful to his principle of the contract, Bakunin, divided between liberty and equality, is obliged from the very outset of his argument constantly to throw over the former for the benefit of the latter, and the latter for the benefit of the former. If Proudhon is a Proudhonian without reproach, Bakunin is a Proudhonian adulterated with detestable communism, nay, even by Marxism. In fact, Bakunin has no longer that immutable faith in the genius of the master Proudhon, whom Tolaine seems to have preserved intact. According to Bakunin, Proudhon, in spite of all his efforts to get a foothold upon the firm ground of reality, remained an idealist and metaphysician. His starting point is the abstract side of law. It is from this that he starts in order to arrive at economic facts, while Marx, on the contrary, has enunciated and proved the truth, demonstrated by the whole of the ancient and modern history of human societies, of people and of states, that economic facts preceded and precede the facts of political and civil law. The discovery and demonstration of this truth is one of the greatest merits of Monsieur Marx. In another of his writings he says, with entire conviction, "All the religions and all the systems of morals that govern a given society are always the ideal expression of its real, material condition, that is, especially of its economic organization, but also of its political organization, the latter, indeed, being never anything but the juridical and violent consecration of the former." And he again mentions Marx as the man to whom belongs the merit of having discovered and demonstrated this truth. One asks oneself with astonishment how this same Bakunin could declare that private property was only a consequence of the principle of authority. The solution of the riddle lies in the fact that he did not understand the materialist conception of history, he was only adulterated by it. And here is the striking proof of this. In the Russian work, already quoted, Statism and Anarchy, he says that in the situation of the Russian people, there are two elements which constitute the conditions necessary for the social, he means socialist, revolution. The Russian people can boast of excessive poverty and unparalleled slavery. Their sufferings are innumerable, and they bear these, not with patience, but with profound and passionate despair that twice already in our history has manifested itself in terrible outbursts, in the revolt of Stefan Razin and in that of Pugachev. And that is what Bakunin understood by the material conditions of a socialist revolution. Is it necessary to point out that this Marxism is a little too unique? While combating Mazzini from the standpoint of the materialist conception of history, Bakunin himself is so far from understanding the true import of this conception that in the same work in which he refutes the Mazzinian theology, he speaks, like the thorough-faced Proudhonian that he is, of absolute human morality, and he bolsters up the idea of this morality, the morality of solidarity, with such arguments as these. Every actual being, so long as he exists only by virtue of a principle which is inherent in himself and which determines his particular nature, a principle that is not imposed upon him by a divine lawgiver of any sort. This is the materialism of our author, but is the protracted and constant result of combinations of natural causes and effects. That is not, according to the ludicrous idea of the idealists, shut up in him like a soul within its body, but is, in fact, only the inevitable and constant form of his real existence. The human, like all other species, has inherent principles quite special to itself, and all these principles are summed up in, or are reducible to, a single principle, which we call solidarity. This principle may be formulated thus: no human individual can recognize his own humanity, nor, therefore, realize it in his life except by recognizing it in others, and by helping to realize it for others. No man can emancipate himself except by emancipating with him all the men around him. My liberty is the liberty of everyone, for I am not truly free, free not only in thought but in deed, except when my liberty and my rights find their confirmation, their sanction, in the liberty and the rights of all men, my equals. As a moral precept, solidarity, as interpreted by Bakunin, is a very excellent thing. But to set up this immorality, which by the way is not at all absolute, a principle inherent in humanity and determining human nature, is playing with words and completely ignoring what materialism is. Humanity only exists by virtue of the principle of solidarity. This is coming in a little too strong. How about the class war, and the cursed state, and property individually hereditary? Are these only manifestations of solidarity, inherent in humanity, determining its special nature, etc., etc.? If this is so, everything is all right, and Bakunin was wasting his time in dreaming of a social revolution. If this is not so, this proves that humanity may have existed by virtue of other principles than that of solidarity, and that this latter principle is by no means inherent in it. Indeed, Bakunin only enunciated his absolute principle in order to arrive at the conclusion that no people could be completely free with solidarity in the human sense of the word, if the whole of humanity is not free also. This is an allusion to the tactics of the modern proletariat, and it is true in the sense that, as the rules of the International Workingmen's Association put it, the emancipation of the workers is not a merely local or national problem, but, on the contrary, a problem concerning every civilized nation, its solution being necessarily dependent upon their theoretical and practical cooperation. It is easy enough to prove this truth by reference to the actual economic situation of civilized humanity. But nothing is less conclusive, here as elsewhere, than a demonstration founded upon a utopian conception of human nature. The solidarity of Bakunin only proves that he remained an incorrigible utopian, although he became acquainted with the historical theory of Marx.